Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Cryptowriter podcast, where we explore some of the more interesting and bleeding edge issues in the crypto space. Today, I am joined with, I don't know what we call you, the interim Satoshi, but Chris Barnes, who recently went through the Eden process as we did a mock or a trial election. And Chris is joining me today to talk about Eden and its significance and I'm going to try to tease all the good details I can out of Chris. Why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are and how you got into this whole situation?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Brandon. I'm super flattered to be provided the opportunity to be here, and you're popping my interviewee cherry, other than like a job interview. So, thank you for that. Yeah, so I've been following crypto, learned about it in 2014, learned about Dan in 2017, really connected to his sort of life vision, life mission of securing life, liberty, property, justice for all, and then learned of EOS. That became sort of the first token that I bought, other than just Bitcoin. I was pretty much a Bitcoin maximalist from the beginning. And I've been a big follower of EOS and a believer of what it can become. And so with that, I learned of the Eden process and just completely enamored with how powerful this can be. And it's so much more than just crypto. Like this, it really isn't a crypto thing, even though that's sort of its foundation. To me, it's an opportunity to really change the world in more ways than just making money and people filling their crypto bags. Like this is the way we select our representatives is so fundamental to society, and it's so obviously broken in its current state. So to me, it's this is a pretty amazing opportunity, and I'm just so humbled that I get to be somehow a part of what this can be.
Yeah, excellent. It was quite the process. And when you went into it, so I guess for the listeners that may not know, let's just give them the ground view kind of idea of what is Eden and how this all came about, maybe. Take it away.
Yeah. Well, I think the foundation is Dan's book, More Equal Animals. And there's a huge sense of irony here that I have not read that book. So I'm sure I was one of the very few of that initial cohort of 64 that had not read his book, which in one way is it's almost better. I came at it just as an individual with my own set of opinions and ideas. And I didn't require that as like a foundational reading to be able to integrate into how it works and succeed, in fact. So I will read that book. I have started the one of the audio versions, but I'll get my hands on a paper copy and I will read it. But to me, the Eden political playoff system is essentially just a completely revolutionary way that groups of people can come to consensus and select their representatives. I think that's basically in a nutshell what it is. And so, any number of size of groups of people, I think the goal with Eden is to eventually get to initial community of 10,000 people maximum. And so within that group, using this system, this format, we can, as a group, come to consensus and select representatives that represent the consensus of that group. And it avoids this idea of political systems and parties, and prevents prevents collusion in a way, and it prevents the capture of the system that then tends to enslave the people underneath it. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
So you went through 3 rounds of this process, and in each round you advanced, and finally you ended up being selected the Satoshi, which is like the top representative under the trial rules. And what do you think? What do you credit that with, given that you kind of a self-described outsider almost in a way? At least you're not super deep into, this whole. You haven't read the book yet, for instance, and Yeah. So what do you credit your success to in terms of brokering all that consensus between each level?
I think that the beginning, part of it was I had a bit of a plan. So I think because it's so new, and I think of the original 64, there were a few of the individuals, or quite a few really, who knew they wanted to do something that contributed to the community, but it wasn't, for the most part, I didn't hear a lot of really well ironed out plans. Like this is exactly what we're going to do. So there was a prize of 1,000 EOS, so roughly $10,000. So there was some money on the line. And so what I did fundamentally was first I reached out to the community the day before on the EOS community forum, asking for just any projects that are looking for representation in Eden, as myself and probably others were looking for things to represent. so I did that. That was super beneficial, so that I was able to sort of have a plan in each of the rounds and able to articulate that plan and be really precise about what exactly I was going to do with the funds and how that was going to benefit the community. I think part of the detractor from the others in my group and some of the other groups that I've listened to, because the video recordings are all there, which is also awesome. It was more just sort of we'd like to work on education or translation, or these super marketing was another, and they're really important concepts and really important that problems that need to be solved, but there were no real solutions provided at the time. So I think that gave me an edge, since what I was promoting was the EOS Power Up service that John Heater from Boyd.com created. That allows for, with the new Power Up model on EOS, any user can basically go and power up their account with a free transaction. So I gravitated to that idea when I read John's proposal in the forum. I reached out to John, asked him if he was okay with it. He was. And so very minimal preparation other than that brought that idea into the playoff. And then I think beyond that, the other talent, I guess, or skill that I have is, without trying, like being as humble as I can, talking about my skills, is an ability to listen to people and really try to reflect on what they're saying, and then incorporate that into a persuasive argument as to why my perspective might be preferable or ideal. And I also just love strategy games. Like I'm an avid strategy board game player. So part of me during the process, I kind of almost forgot about maybe the bigger thing, and I just kind of got into this game mode. All right, how do I win this one? What do I need to say? Without being disingenuous. I mean, you're obviously trying to be honest in yourself, but you need to be tactful and thoughtful about how you're going to convince others to vote for you. So it's an important skill that I think people who will do well in this will need to have, an ability to achieve consensus in a group.
Right, and not just to vote for you, but to select you as the most skillful bearer of their agenda or their hopes and wishes for the network, for development on the network, in the case of EOS.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not, it's interesting, yeah. And you alluded to the fact that you kind of began the process before the playoffs even started. I'm sorry, shouldn't call them the playoffs, but the fractal, it's just like, yeah, it's the fractal governance process, the Eden governance process that we all participated in. Yeah, you alluded to the fact that your process with that started early by querying the community, what they were, interested in. How do you see that sort of life or that culture extending into the EOS community in a way that would benefit the playoffs? Like, are there any processes that you imagine could be helpful to the community that would set them up for even more productive and efficient playoffs or governance?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is a playoff. I think that's it felt like it. At the end of it, I was tired.
Yeah.
Like it was, 3 rounds back to back to back, 50 minutes each, hard thinking. Like, yeah, it's mentally tiring.
I guess just to be clear, the only reason I react against the playoffs that way is because from the very beginning I've been trying to think of a a less adversarial name, because I feel like
Right.
there's some element of playoffs that is like winners and losers, and I really feel like this process kind of creates a bunch of winners.
Yeah.
And because yeah, I mean, for the
It,
reasons that should be self-evident, like if we select somebody who's more capable of carrying our vision forward, we're all served. So
you make a
that's
good
my
point.
only.
Yeah. It's a collaborative playoff of sorts and the community wins in the end. I mean, that's if this happens in future rounds, future events, the community should always end up the winner. I mean, that's so, and I think so. Interesting what you say, because I've overheard many people, and I felt the same way too. Is during earlier rounds when people were discussing and selecting who they were going to move forward. Um, those people who move forward always had in the back of their mind sort of some of the comments and requests from those who were in their group in the previous round. So that's interesting. So you're not just representing yourself once you move forward to the next round. You actually are representing your group. So then that group is still within you, and then the same thing continues to the next round. So, as you get to the top, you're really just a small, assuming you've listened to what the others said along the way, and you try to represent that, you become, fractal in a way in terms of your thought process. It's little pieces from the others. So it is it's not just about you, right? It's about those that kind of got you there and what they said, what they wanted out of it. But to answer your question about how future rounds or events could take place and what the community can do to prepare, I think communication is going to be key, where people should start to try to collect into groups of like-minded ideas, like-minded projects. If, for example, there was a few who wanted to see translation become a big piece of what Eden can do, is to help expand the community in different languages, which is somewhat English focused in some of it. And another piece was, say, education. We need to expand the education piece. So those who are interested in this process and want to contribute and participate, I think it would be quite wise to take the time to listen through and watch through some of the videos of what people were debating and what they were advocating for, and then find those people and reach out to them and start to form groups and come up with a plan and and the plan should include, like, how are you going to use the money? Because at some point in time, there's going to be millions of dollars at play if this continues as expected. And so if you want people to trust you with hundreds of thousands of dollars, slice of those millions, you should have a really good, well-formulated, deliberate plan, with proper, find somebody who has some financial background. It can help you draw out an OPEX and CAPEX, and what's your roadmap look like? How's the timing? How are you going to deliver what you're promising to deliver? So people should group together in like-minded groups and ideas, and then start to work as a team. It's like Dan said, right? The part of the goal of this is 1 + 1 = 3. If we do this right, that's the power of community. And so I think that's important that people take, and that in fact is that's a lot of the reason why I ended up winning, because I didn't just go in it with my own pet project. I went in representing someone else, and John and I ended up in the final round together, both representing the same project. So talk about the odds stacked in our favor. We were both there, so it made it easier.
Yeah, that it's a great answer. I mean, you covered a lot there. We can learn a lot from how this first round went down and what the effective strategies were. And yeah, it's interesting what you say about the grouping, the natural desire for people to want to group together around causes that are specific to them. And I'm sure, even block producers, any member of the community is going to be able to form like affinity groups essentially.
Yeah.
And then if to the extent that we're all able to listen to each other's needs and concerns and incorporate that, it's like the best aggregator of community needs will tend to rise further in the governance process, is one thesis. So that
It
would
makes
be a nice.
sense. Well, because in the end, you're meant to, when you move forward, you're representing the larger group. So you're absolutely right. You need to be able to aggregate what that group stands for, and be able to express it. I think another piece that's important is sort of, it's for example, the stereotypical maybe introvert developer might have a harder time in this process. And there's few who are quite articulate, like John, for example. I mean, that guy's a renaissance man of sorts. I barely know him, but from what I've learned about him, he's brilliant and articulate, and really, really, he should have won. Like, really, he is far more deserving of the title Satoshi of Eden. Like, I don't know how to code. I'm just a regular dude who hasn't really done a fraction of what John has done. But that being said, my ability to perhaps articulate a little better, and to persuade a little better, worked in my favor. So it wasn't just about the skills that you have that really are directly applicable to coding and EOS. It's which makes this all the more exciting, and it should be all the more empowering to people like me who aren't developers, love EOS, want to contribute, feel like they're disempowered to really contribute because they're not on a development team, they don't know how to build projects. Well, here's a chance to find out what skills do you have and figure out how you can leverage those skills within a group of like-minded individuals who want to work towards a common goal, a common project.
Well said. So I'm taking this right out of our thoughts from earlier. What does Eden mean to the world?
Yeah, I love that question. To me, Eden could change the world. I mean, it sounds hyperbolic, but if Eden, the process as I see it, and after experiencing it, has the capacity to revolutionize how groups of people, so that could be municipalities, countries, really. I mean, that's really what this comes down to. Countries could select their representatives. Like, this could change. It would be extremely difficult to overthrow the current power structure, to accept this as a possible method to replace them, because they would surely get replaced. But right? I mean, so you could. So how this would work, for those who don't understand, is you could basically take the entire United States population and you would subdivide that group of people into random groups of 10.
Wait a second. Shouldn't you be starting in Canada with this?
Yeah, well, I figured the audience is probably more familiar with the. If I speak about Justin Trudeau, I mean, yes, I could go a long way with that one, but.
Okay, I'm just playing with you. I just had to throw that at you. Go for it.
Yeah, no, fair. Yeah, so you could take any country, right? So let's use the US. You basically divide the population into completely random groups of 10. And those groups will include Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, and pick your Donald Trump, pick your favorite political leader. But they'll also include you, Brandon Lovejoy, and they'll include Daniel Larimer and Brock Pierce, and these guys who aren't politicians, but they are certainly individuals who have great integrity. And even, I mean, Brock Pierce even ran in the recent U.S. election, right? So I think he'd have a much better chance in this type of political playoff than he would in what he had to compete against, right? So you could take the entire population of the U.S., random groups of 10, whoever's the best at finding consensus. And sure, Joe Biden's first group, he's got a good shot, because I mean, it might be just some randoms. I mean, okay, fine, Joe wins, but there's going to come a point where he's meeting up with some PhDs and some extremely thoughtful, charismatic individuals who aren't just a part of the oligopoly and have been put there based on deep pockets and special interests. And so like, he's not going to win. Those guys are not going to win in that system, because the only way you move forward is by convincing the others in your group in a 2/3 + 1 majority that they should vote for you. Well, good luck doing that when you're a contentious political leader who gets 30% approval rating. Like, you're not going to get to the 66% in the randomized groups when you can only get to 30% now. So poof, I mean, it would disrupt everything. And now you actually have leaders that would rise to the top who effectively and actually do represent the people as it's supposed to be. I mean, it's revolutionary.
So just to play devil's advocate for a moment, so say Joe Biden is in a group with a group of people that pulled randomly from whatever county he's in, and they're all working class folks. And Joe says, look, I know none of you want this. Like, I'll make it worth your time. I'll just give you $1,000 each, and send me on to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play out in the real quote real world scenario?
I think it would work for the first round or two, but then you're going to start getting up against people who want to be there for the right reason. Like, I think what this does is this process selects for people who have integrity, because you have to convince. It's going to take some deep pockets to be able to bribe your way all to the top. And then it's not going to be a secret, because the other thing is these debates amongst groups are recorded. So they're there for posterity, and Joe won't know in advance who he's teamed up with. So he can't bribe them in advance of the vote, which today happens.
So you think overt bribery would be treated less kindly than covert bribery, which is what we have today through lobbying and stuff?
I think so, because now the covert bribery can be rationalized or obfuscated to not seem apparent. Like, I like what who is it? Jesse Ventura, I think he said once that he wished that politicians would wear logos like NASCAR racers do, so at least you could see who you're voting for.
Absolutely.
Right? So in this case, it would have to be overt. It would be very obvious, and it would be recorded. And even if Joe could manage to make it happen the first time and get himself near the top, I just don't see how you'd have, because it would take, I forget what Dan said, for the population size of the US, maybe 7 rounds or something to get to the winner. I think once you get to round 5, 6, 7, I mean, that's a small slice of the population, and assuming those people didn't bribe their way in too. So now who's bribing with the most when you get to those rounds? And so if everyone's a briber, well, I mean, who wins? Nobody wins, and then you get a stalemate. And that's where I think it's merit that will shine, and people who have integrity and are believable and have a track record that's provable. And it would only take one round of elections to have this overt bribery show up, and you'd be pooched going forward, because your social score would be ruined. I mean, what's so cool about this is this brings in this tribal dynamic of where right now we have these huge metropolitan cities and social media where anonymity allows for people just to become assholes, pardon my French. Like, it's right, you can get away when you're driving in a city and someone cuts you off, you have no problem giving them the finger. But if it was a small town in a community, someone cuts you off, you don't need to give them the finger, because you know who it is, and you can tell all your neighbors about what they did. I mean, they become a social outcast based on their actions. I mean, really this process brings back this innate tribal sense that we all have, like our gossip and all these things that have evolved in human psychology. Those become far more impactful and real in this type of scenario, and they remove this anonymous ability to just be a jerk and have no social repercussions.
So bring back the gossip. Are you familiar with the
serves a tool?
The gossip protocol, Clarion?
I'm not. I've heard. I know of it high level, certainly, and I'm excited for what it can stand for. But I don't know the ins and outs as you might.
I heard Dan call it a gossip protocol once, and I think he said, I know he said gossip, I don't know if he said protocol, but I think so. And I really like that expression.
Gossip serves a purpose. It's
right. There's a certain like regular, like a natural feedback loop that occurs in a community. And when it's small, say like under Dunbar's number, which is like 150, then people will tell you exactly what they think about what you did. And they'll put all their credibility on the line when they do it. And you'll have to stand with all your credibility on the line as well. And it's more of a reputational sort of network. What is Eden doing, to your mind, under Dan's conception, to counteract the, or to rather to restore the sort of reputational feature set that we?
I think the biggest part of that is the fact that these discussions and debates, as you work your way up the rounds, are recorded. So it's not just, no, you said this. You told me you said that. No, I didn't. He said, she said. In this case, when you make promises to get yourself elected to the next round, to convince your peers, your random group of peers, to trust you with their vote because you're going to represent them, you would have had to have made promises or had a pre-existing reputation based on previous promises that you kept. So by having that recorded and uploaded to IPFS for ever, then there's a check and balance now to what you said you're going to do and what you actually do. I mean, how often today do we see politicians campaigning during an election period and promising everything under the sun. And as soon as they get elected, accountability is gone. They are no longer at all. It's so obvious you'd have to have your head buried 6 feet under the sand to not recognize how these politicians chronically flip on what they say, and they just are speaking to their immediate audience, trying to garner favor, even though it has nothing to do with how they actually feel as an individual. And that, to me, politicians these days are puppets. I mean, it's a group of puppets. So where's the integrity there? You know, what are you voting for? Again, like Jesse Ventura said, you're not voting for that person. You're voting for their special interest groups who are pulling the strings. Not to be too contentious.
I mean, I feel like you could walk into a bar in the United States and just say that, and everyone would be like, yeah, we know. But I'm too busy, whatever. Or,
well, there's no solution.
There's no solution.
No solution. There's such a I mean, there's no wonder why voting turnout is so low, because people recognize it's pointless. There is zero change. I mean, how many politicians will campaign on change, and yet nothing changes? So it doesn't take too many times for those sort of that ethos to be used to get elected, to then be like, no, that was a lie, to then realize there's never change. So yeah, no wonder no one wants to vote, and it's a waste of time. Essentially, it feels like anyway. But in this situation, it would take one round. It would just take one round for people to participate, as evidenced by the 64 in this first trial run of Eden. How many of those from that group felt like, wow, this is the most amazing thing. I feel like my voice has been heard, and the next person who represented me actually represented me, and it wasn't just a false representation and a broken promise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I gather you're not a fan of incremental change. unless it's like walking down the steps, which you want one step at a time to break that ultimate kinetic force into smaller manageable steps. That's nice. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think we'd all, I mean, if you put it to a vote, no pun intended, like like or walked into a bar and said, who would rather have this process to determine the outcome of who's running the show right now? I think obviously if people understood the system and compared it against the existing one, there's no question it's an upgrade. In fact, I have various, I can't cite sources, but I know that the US voting system, the first past the post, like two-party system setup, is among the voting systems possibly the most preeminent at producing irrational outcomes, in terms of, like, if you wanted to create a voting system that produced more irrational outcomes, you'd be hard pressed to do it. And this is something that, like, advocates of instant runoff voting, for instance, use, because instant runoff voting allows you to, like, at least not end up with preferences that are, like, being expressed that are opposite to your intent. So it's like, I wanted to vote for the super progressive guy, but I got the super regressive guy or whatever, So, but yeah, political playoff solves that same problem in a completely different manner by kind of scaling the wisdom of the crowd.
And it's not, and what I love about it too, it's easy to understand. Like this, you don't need a dissertation in political science to understand how this process works. It is intuitively obvious, which is another reason why I love it. Like it doesn't take much to explain the idea of random groups picking a leader, moving on to another random group, settling on a final leader. It's intuitively obvious.
Okay, so your elevator breaks down, and you're in the elevator with a high school teacher. And she's like, what do you do? and you explain, you're like, well, one of the most interesting things I've worked on recently is Eden. How do you ground level that?
So I guess I would start with a question and ask them to describe, say you had, how do you come to select your representatives in a group, in a community? And they would probably say, you see who you're voting for, political parties, you listen to their campaigns and what they're going to do, and then you select what you want best. And then, but sometimes I'm not voting for the person I want. I'm voting because I want that person not to win. So I'm actually just going to pick another party just to make sure that the bad guy doesn't win. Like this happens all the time. The two-party system is certainly a byproduct of that. There is no third party really in the United States. Canada, we've got a couple other outside parties. And then you hear this argument all the time. Oh, you're wasting your vote voting for that third party because then you're just guaranteeing, because, everything's about a binary decision, left, right, red, blue, blah, 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 and which I think is completely deliberate by our controllers. But regardless,
Okay, so say the school teacher buys into all that, and she's
yeah,
like,
okay.
or he is like, yeah,
Okay.
I'm totally
So,
with you.
exactly. So instead, here's an option. So you take that same 1,000 people, and instead of looking at the people, the representatives that have somehow been pre-selected for you, you become, and everyone becomes a potential candidate, including the two that you would normally be faced with. So, I mean, if they're that good, then they should be able to convince a random group of 10 that they're that good, right? I mean, this is who you get to vote for normally. So certainly they're there for merit. Should they not be? I mean, shouldn't they be there for merit and the ability to do what they say they're going to do? So, and the answer is, well, yeah, they should, right? I mean, any fair person would say that. So then you say, in this system, you take that same group of people, including the two traditional representatives in the two-party system, but instead they're subdivided into groups, random groups of 10, and they just have to convince their group that they're the best. Should be easy. And then whoever moves on to the next group, random group of 10, do it again, random group of 10. So then the question you have to ask yourself is, do you think those same two people end up being the choices to choose between? Or do you think maybe there might be some other people in that group of 1,000 that in fact might have more merit and more capacity to deliver what they say they're going to do and more integrity? And so I think the obvious answer is yes, there's a super great chance. I mean, look around. I mean, it's so obvious because you look at who you get to choose from, and that's the best choice. I mean, really, Donald Trump and Joe Biden were the best two individuals in all of the United States of America, 330 million people. And those two are the prime, the pinnacle of superior leadership and authenticity and compassion and, right? I mean, it's a joke. I mean, of course. So it doesn't take much to be like, yeah, you're right. That makes no sense. And surely there's better options. So if you do this way, you actually have a chance to have those better options express themselves and convince and move up, and boom.
Okay, so your the elevator is still stuck, and your school teacher is like, yeah, at least they don't smell or anything. You're fine.
Right.
You're comfortable. It's not overheating yet. You're a little worried, but you're not too concerned. And the school teacher looks at you and says, okay, well, that's all well and good. It may well produce better outcomes, but people will never do it. People will never. Why would people make the change? Like what we have now, everyone's so busy, they're rationally ignorant, they don't have time for starting a new system of governance. So it's not going to work. Great idea though.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that I don't know the answer to that question. I have a.
You don't have to have the answer to the question.
My hunch is the only way. See, I think those who are in control have been in control for generations. I mean, really. I mean, in my perspective. So I think the ability to really effect change on, especially a country like the United States, that the grips of control and power are so well instantiated. I agree with the school teacher. You're right. It's a pipe dream. But you know what? We could do, school teacher. Why do we need to go to the top? Why do we need to, I mean, yes, that's the final goal, but let's start small. Let's do it incrementally. So why not present this at your next parent-teacher meeting to select your parent-teacher reps, or however teacher reps, I guess, right? Or in your municipality of 3,000 people, like bring this to the municipality and use this method as a revolutionary method to select the mayor or the leader of. So we start small and gradually get this idea out there. The grassroots opportunity is there, where maybe people can see this as being a legitimate option, and then maybe slowly but surely it can work its way up to the big show. But that's, that's a lofty goal. I think things are probably more likely to break into a million pieces and turn into chaos. But then, you know what though? Hey, even if that's what happens. Oh, I keep losing my mic here. I hope it's messing up. Even if that happens, and things get bad, which, I mean, well, the world of COVID, things are kind of bad. Even if it gets really bad and things really start to fracture, I think part of what we need to do here is spread this possibility, spread this method of coming to consensus and organizing groups now. So if things do get bad and maybe there's a power issue and we lose connectivity with the world at large, we still have our communities, hopefully. And so the more people who know about this way of doing this maybe can bring it to the respective community in light of a crisis and say, hey, who's going to, at first, certainly in a crisis situation, the might makes right and the law of the jungle will kick in and probably the strongest would try to take charge. But if you can convince enough people and to use civility, this becomes a great opportunity to quickly organize a group of people. Because the other thing that's cool about this is you could in a short, if you had a group of people in a room, you could very quickly organize this out. And I've heard Dan describe that it's in his book where, with a deck of cards, you don't need crazy tech to make this work. You just need to randomize people and slowly work through this process until a couple hours later, you've got a new leader. And it's not just the leader too, it's the people in the final group become almost like a board. And so, yeah, the more people that know about this process now in advance of some bad societal collapse, the better I see it. And that's personally what I'm happy and so thrilled to be doing this now. Not to be overly pessimistic, but I think that's a real possibility. And so it's super important that we share this philosophy and idea in advance of what could, hopefully never does, but could come.
Yeah, I think people innovating new methods of reaching group consensus might be one of the most advantageous things we could be putting energy into right now. Yeah, for all the reasons you just mentioned. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, your options are like ruled by power or ruled by social cohesion. Those are kind of your options.
Yeah, and what are you going to pick, right? If you
and no one, I was going to say, no one wants totalitarianism. Yeah. They just don't.
No.
Like, I don't know, maybe totalitarian rule would be.
Yeah, a benevolent dictator. How bad could it be? Till they die.
Yeah, there's argument for that at some scale, like, and in some ways, like a chief or like a leader in certain tribal scenarios are the person that everyone trusts the most to. In that way, it's very much like representative, but it's still a power that can be taken away. So it's ultimately not very totalitarian at all. Exactly. Okay, so I think we figured out most of the ills of society and how to solve them. But what about EOS? So to bring this all full circle, because Eden is launching first on EOS, how do you see this playing out? What do you think is in the cards for Eden on EOS? Are you optimistic? Do you think the community is going to just be like a beacon, an exemplar of how this can play out, or is it going to be like just a slog the whole way? What do you feel?
Well, first, I think EOS needs this. And I think all cryptocurrencies, whether they recognize it or not, their method of governance and who they trust as being their leaders is questionable, right? Like and EOS has, especially with the recent hack and what the block producers did. Some people don't like it, some people do. The way I see the timing is incredible for what we're doing because we are members of the EOS community. And so the way I see it is this is a chance to prove to those who are suspect of this process and whether it's going to work and can it be gamed and captured and collusion is going to take place and the money is going to be siphoned off by people turns out they were liars, and those are all risks. And yes, that might happen on edge cases, but I think the large portion of funding that is going to come into this, that it's for now, because it's on EOS, it's meant to be deliberately for EOS. So here's an opportunity for us to have people like myself, nobodies in this space. I'm a little mini minnow of like token possession. Like I don't develop, I'm not known, I'm a nobody. And here I am, a guy who amongst 64 peers was able to come out on top. And so that, and so why, right? So why did I make it? And part of it is because I legitimately care about the EOS ecosystem. I really want it to succeed. I really want Dan's mission and his life vision to be realized. And So anybody who's in the EOS ecosystem should kind of want the same, even if it's just because they hold tokens and they want their bags to get, heavier. That's so you should be supportive of this. And as long as, so I see this as a chance to prove that people like myself can rise to the top and do good things for the community to help EOS, the currency, the token, the network become stronger. And so part of that, I think, a lot of questions, and I've been asking a lot of people directly about what they think Eden could have done in this recent hack, for example. And I've been deliberately going out to people to see if I can canvass and get a bunch of people who are much smarter than myself to provide some suggestions. And so I can aggregate those and then, try to work on that solution. Like, what could have Eden done? Could Eden have a multi-sig as part of the board to then help intervene? Could the block producers come to the Eden board to help make a decision, to ratify a decision? Could there be contracts be built with sort of approval from Eden, or some sort of acceptance of Eden as being a potential arbiter in future disputes? So then, future DApp contracts get actually written deliberately with some sort of incorporation of the Eden board. And so you can leverage these trusted people, hopefully trusted. I mean, if you get to the top, you better be trusted. And if you get to the top and you're not trusted, well, you're not going to get there a second time. So, and you're not alone. Like, I'm not on an island. Even out of the 64, I'm part of the final four. I see it like we're a group of four. I will not make any decisions unilaterally just because I'm the guy who won. I'm gonna go back to the other three, and it'll be a group decision. And if anything, I'd go back to the community if it required that.
Quick question. It just occurred to me, maybe this is interesting. What percentage of EOS token holders do you feel would be required to be participating in Eden for Eden to be considered kind of a legitimate representative government? Like, let's say there was still 50% of all EOS token holders not participating in Eden. Is that a problem, or how do we measure buy-in relative? It's just it's interesting when one group, especially not weighted by tokens necessarily, begin to develop a consensus about political decisions pertaining to the chain. Like, how do you resolve that?
It's a great question. I'd be curious how many EOS token holders are there? I mean, that's an undefinable answer probably anyway. But so one thing is, to get into Eden, this isn't a closed wall group. You can get in. You just need to be able to kind of prove who you are and that you're someone who can be trusted. I think Dan had mentioned that people who get into Eden are those you would be able to trust with your own funds, and thereby extension trust with community funds. So part of it is that it's not restricted access. So if you're a token holder and you want to participate, you will be able to participate. I don't see how there's any border, because especially the idea of 6 degrees of separation. Eventually, you may not know someone yet who is in the Eden group, because you need to be invited by someone who's already an existing member. But it's not going to take long for exponential growth to kick in, where you actually will know somebody. And if you don't know somebody, well, then reach out, get to know somebody. I've had a few people contact me who just want to talk, and it's like, awesome. Like, I'm not even in Eden yet. Not officially. So, if you want to participate so that you feel comfortable that this is a legitimate process, then participate. So there's no restriction to entry there. And then, yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying the fact that it's fundamentally open access, provided you can get into the network, which eventually should be no big problem.
Yeah.
For somebody who was legitimately part of the EOS community and wanted to participate, like, there would actually be no barriers there. So
that's right.
That kind of in a way addresses the potential problem of Eden speaking for a group that is not participating.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is really important is, so it's going to be incremental funding. Like, we're going to slowly increase the amount of community funds. I mean, eventually these funds will be community funds of some form or fashion. It would be great if Eden could self-fund itself. at least the initial group, and there will be subgroups. The other thing that people should realize is Eden isn't just this one, you know, just one group. Eventually, there will be subgroups divided by regions and languages, because that's the other thing. We want inclusivity is super important, and not everyone's going to be able to competently articulate their views in an English debate with people, right? If they're, not, they're speaking Spanish or Chinese or pick your language. So there will be other groups that will form, and then you get to join that group, and they become a community of communities, right? There'll be multiple Edens. And so again, the power of how it's hard to argue that this is going to make it worse for EOS. I mean, this is a huge opportunity to create a far more cohesive and collaborative community amongst different regions and languages. And then even for the whales, even like a whale, might say, oh, I got too much money in stake. This is gonna, okay, fine, fair enough. Sell your tokens if you're that worried, or wait it out and just give it a while, give it a chance, right? So I've got 1,000 EOS to play with technically, and I'm gonna use that to help the community and help improve the EOS Power Up service, the free usage of that. So okay, once that's not a big deal, but let's wait to the next one if you're not sure. Let's see what comes out of that. I have a feeling that some exceptionally great things are going to come from the various groups as these elections take place, and it'll become more and more obvious that this is in fact a great thing, because if each of these respective elections yield a result that benefits the EOS blockchain, that benefits the EOS token holders, including the whales. So I would suggest just reserve your negative opinions if you have one. I mean, express them so they can be heard, but don't conclude just yet that this is a write-off or it's not going to work and it's going to be gamed. Just express why you think that. Have your opinions heard so we can try to see if we can mitigate some risks that we're not aware of. But I don't know. I see this over time proving itself via its merit and not just a bunch of promises.
Cool. I felt like it was my responsibility to ask you some harder questions, since I'm such a proponent of Eden. So I try to put myself in the position of somebody that might think this is all wacky ideas by wacky people on the internet,
right?
Trying to fix things.
Yeah. What am I selling, right?
Yeah. Well, very cool. Do you have any? I think, we're kind of creeping up on an hour. I like to keep these more digestible. We've covered a ton of topics already just in this short interview. Is there any kind of parting thoughts or additional things that you want to mention before we wrap her up?
Yeah, people who are listening, who this is new to you, I would highly encourage you to consider the bigger picture here. Even if you're just an EOS token holder and you're just thinking of your bags, try to step out of that mindset for a second and think about how the bigger picture, like what this could mean to the world at large. I think it's an inspiring idea, and it's far beyond just what this means for the EOS blockchain and the token price. This is big. So I would encourage that, and then look for Dan. Dan's book is for free. You can go to More Equal Animals. I assume, I don't know the exact URL, but I mean you can go and download it for free, and it's incredible from what I've been listening so far. It is an extremely well-written book full of extremely compelling ideas, and it's an easy read too. Well, listen, it's also an easy listen, but yeah, I think try to get involved. If you're like me and you think, no, I'm a nobody. What am I going to do? You're looking at a nobody, and look what I was able to do. It's not a lot. I wasn't able to do a lot, but hey, I'm here, and if you're listening to me, then obviously I've done something. So, take that as maybe a form of small inspiration, and get involved. Find people who think like you think, and just try to participate.
Nobody is a nobody. Just when you think you don't have value, you might just be like the very key to a whole thing coming together. That's an interesting aspect of all this too, is people can kind of be pressed into service. Like, you may find yourself participating in a process and just happen to be able to articulate something, and suddenly you find that you've captivated the group, in a way that no one else has, and now they want you to carry their message forward, and you're like, no, 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 I'm not a leader.
Yeah, talk to
But
Dan. Dan's better.
you may be the leader, you may be the leader that round, and you didn't even expect it. So I kind of appreciate that this process, yeah, can produce kind of unknown outcomes in terms of what the group values in terms of integrity and communication and things of that nature. So very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks, man.
yeah, it's been great, great having you on the show, and I look forward to all sorts of future elections to be had under the Eden process.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
enjoy being interim Satoshi. And
Yeah.
while you can, you're the first ever interim Satoshi, and congratulations. And it's been a total pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks, man. It's an honor, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for showing, having the interest to hearing what I want to say, or have to say.
Absolutely. All right, this has been another Cryptowriter podcast. Blocks Populi is the name of the show. I'm Brandon Lovejoy, your host, if I didn't say that at the beginning, because I always forget to do that. Yeah, we'll see you next time. Peace.